Hey everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about the respiratory zone, and specifically I'll be discussing the various ways in which oxygen is transported throughout the body, and I'll also briefly touch on why oxygen is the most important molecule in our bodies as it relates to respiration. So the primary function of the lungs and the respiratory system collectively is to provide oxygen to different body tissues for cellular respiration. Every time you take a breath, your lungs receive a large quantity of oxygen. During exhalation, there's still a bit of oxygen being exhaled, but for the most part, the highest chemical quantity during exhalation is carbon dioxide. An important thing to note here is that oxygen is required as a final electron acceptor in cellular respiration. And it is just a note. But without oxygen, our bodies would be unable to initiate the electron transport chain, which produces a large number of adenosine triphosphate molecules, otherwise known as ATP. So, in other words, without respiration, our high energy way of living would pretty much be impossible, given that we are multicellular organisms and respire aerobically. The adverse to this adverse, pardon me, would be anaerobic respiration, which deals primarily with fermentation. We do initiate fermentation in glycolysis, but the bulk of our energy comes from oxygen as a final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain. So once we move past the conducting zone, we move into the respiratory zone. This is where terminal bronchioles feed air into respiratory bronchioles. These respiratory bronchioles will eventually lead into alveolar ducts, which are mainly composed of terminal clusters of alveolar sacs. Given that the lung's primary function is gas exchange, it really makes sense that these alveolar sacs containing the alveoli compose most of the volume in the lungs. And there's quite a few of these alveoli, about 300 million of them. The reason there's so many is that we require a large quantity of oxygen to maintain homeostasis. So now we move into the alveoli itself and some of their features. So up at the top, we have our terminal bronchial, pardon me, which is no longer cartilaginous. At this level, it's almost entirely smooth muscle. And when air is brought down through the lungs, this structure will initiate bronchodilation, which allows the smooth muscle to relax and expand. And in turn, this allows a larger volume of air to enter the respiratory bronchioles, which then passes through the alveolar ducts and into the alveolar sac. So then over on this side, we can see the external features of an alveoli. These blue arteries on the side go down into the alveoli and deposit carbon dioxide in these capillaries. And then this red capillary next to it picks up the inhaled oxygen from the alveoli and transports the newly oxygenated blood through the pulmonary vein, which leads back to the heart. So as we enter the microscopic histology of the alveoli, you'll notice these simple squamous epithelial cells right here. This is a very thin layer of cells, which is vital for the exchange of oxygen as well as carbon dioxide. Additionally, their proper name would be type 1 alveolar cells. And these red things here, these circles, kind of, they're capillaries. And as I previously mentioned, these capillaries go to and from the heart, as well as to every other major artery, vein, and capillary in the body. And of course, your alveolus contains a macrophage. And these macrophages are pretty much vital for keeping everything clean. They generally just make sure, dust and pathogens are not there, keeping everything pretty clean. And then these yellowish cells, these are very important. They're known as type 2 alveolar cells, and they secrete pulmonary surfactant, which is a surface acting agent that is used to open up the alveoli and cause the trace amounts of water in the alveoli to decrease in surface tension, which causes the alveoli to open and expand more fluidly, thus allowing more oxygen to enter the blood without being inhibited by the small amounts of water in the alveoli. Because remember, the lungs are highly moist, and the type 2 alveolar cells are really the only thing responsible for minimizing the effects of the surface tension of the water. So just to kind of recap what I just said, we have our type 1 alveolar cells, It's a squamous epithelial cell, very porous. Things can pass through it, such as gases. You have our type 2 alveolar cell. It secretes pulmonary surfactant, and like I said, it reduces the surface tension of the water. And then these are technically called alveolar macrophages, but really they're just phagocytes. They live in the immune system, and their whole job is to remove debris and pathogens that have, come into the alveoli, but they can pretty much be anywhere in the body. So now we move to an actual microscopic diagram outlining the basic features of essentially what we just discussed. So the lumen of the bronchiole, right up here, turns into a respiratory bronchiole, which then leads to an alveolar duct, and so on. And up here we have our actual alveoli, which as you can see are connected to each other through many alveolar ducts. See, these lines right here, they're very closely connected. So in this sense, air that is inhaled is not sent just to one alveolar sac, but rather the air is sent to every alveoli in your lungs. This is just another way our bodies remain homeostatic. So if one alveolar sac, for example, isn't functional, the air will simply pass through these many other alveolar pores to initiate gas exchange. So just to summarize, so the information is a little easier to digest, we have our alveoli, which has an alveolar duct, allowing it to open up to many other alveoli for the sake of maximizing oxygen collection. Then we have an alveolar sac. It's just a collection of alveoli that maximize the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen in the blood. And from there, we have our alveolar pores, which connect to each other and allow an equal air pressure in the lungs. So now I'm going to discuss in a bit more depth how oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange occurs on a chemical level. This begins with the air-blood barrier, which consists of the alveolar walls, and as I said previously about a lot now, I've said this probably too much, the walls are composed of simple squamous epithelium. So in simpler terms, the alveolar walls, the capillary walls, and two fused basal lamina are permeable to molecules such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and a few other gases. So here's a good diagram that illustrates how the air-blood barrier works. So this beige line here is the lining of the capillary. This is our basal lamina, this kind of bluish line. And then in here we have the squamous epithelia of the alveolus. So that's what that is. And what we have here is oxygen. You've inhaled oxygen, so there it is. It has two ways it can get into your blood system. It can go straight through this membrane right here, and it can be dissolved into the plasma. Then you can have oxygenated blood plasma. Or it can go up to a red blood cell, and it can bind to this hemoglobin. And it's just that simple. And then suddenly this blood cell has been oxygenated, and it can go back up, and it can be sent to the heart, it can be sent out through the arteries and go wherever it needs to go. For carbon dioxide, it's a little bit different. So you have carbon dioxide in your blood plasma. When that's there, it pretty much just goes through the membrane and you exhale it. It's gone. However, if it's, in the blood, you have a carbonate group, right? And then you have a free hydrogen ion. This is acidic, so it changes the pH of your blood down here in this capillary next to your alveolus. It's more acidic, and that's not good. And then you have this carbonic acid group, and that will basically just be dissociated into a water molecule and a carbon dioxide molecule. And from there, it's pretty easy. As I said, your alveolus, it has water in it. The lungs are very moist. So the water is not a problem, it can get in there. And then the CO2 is a gas, so it goes through the membrane and then it's exhaled and then it's gone. And so this process, it's continuing. Every time your heart beats, every time you breathe, every time you exhale, this is what's going on. And that's just about all I have for you today. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new, and thank you so much for watching.